So there's a lot of guys who just couldn't make it as a sponsored or a professional skateboarder. They found other ways to participate. You know, everyone kind of just like, if you love skateboarding, you just kind of like, you want to be around it, you want to participate in it, so you find the thing that interests you, or where you have talent, or where you have a gift, an ability that you can lend to it. And it was at that time that, you know, that some guys decided, you know, maybe I should start my own brand. But the interesting thing about that is these aren't people who really know business or have any, like, you know, proper education in running businesses. It was more of a creative thing. It was more of like an aesthetic thing. Like, this would be a cool logo, this is a cool name, this would make a rad t-shirt, this would be a cool board graphic. So it started from a very creative place, you know, which probably explains why it took so long for the industry to really become what it is today. You know, it's like we had to like whittle our way through the 90s, you know, with a lot of that same spastic energy that we had when we were younger in the parking lots, you know, doing our thing and down the streets. And, you know, we took that same energy and started to try to create an industry of our own. And I think that's kind of what you see today.
So Underworld was gone, Underworld Element was gone, and there was just sort of this like element, Underworld Element, no man's land. And so Andy had left, and I had this opportunity to, you know, change the company or start a new company or do something.
And then at that time I spoke to Johnny and said, Johnny, you know, you have the opportunity right now to either start a new brand or you can take over Element, Underworld Element, which was really at the time pretty much a dead dog, right?
Johnny took over Element and dropped Underworld and sort of changed the whole tone of the brand to being something that was more socially conscious.
And I really loved the idea of this company that had a positive vibe and stood for something.
It was a total 180 switch from what it was to what it became.
When I was drawing the logo and I was trying to think about it, something that represented the company, I kept kind of going back to this. It always made me think of like something permanent and something that everyone could relate to. And to me, this place represents that too. So I kind of like put a piece of this inside the company.
I think Element and Johnny were influenced by the trees. Some of the pine trees around here are 100 feet tall. And they're colorful and they're green all year long.
And I'd heard a story that in some of the, biggest forest fires that take place on the earth, that there's only one thing that's ever left standing and living, and it was a tree. And it had like green on it, and the bark's still intact, and just the base of the tree is just black and charred. And to me, that really stood for a lot. It represented, growth, and it represented endurance, and it felt like that was almost like the story of my life. And I wanted the logo for Element to be a tree. And that's sort of what this company stood for, was survival, beating the odds, growing. And I wanted the E to be the icon for Element. And then I just quickly, because I was so obsessed with this idea of a tree logo, that I just took the three pieces of the E that stick out and just kicked them down and then mirrored it, and there was a tree. So deep inside the Element tree logo is an E that most people don't see, that I always see because that's how the logo was first created. I remember I had looked up the word element in the dictionary. Actually, the dictionary's sitting right there. If you go to the word element in that dictionary, it's actually cut out, because I cut it out and you pasted it on my desk. And it said, element, one of the four substances to compose the physical universe: wind, water, fire, and earth. And at the time within skateboarding, when it was pretty dark, all of a sudden there's this, logo of a tree, and it just didn't go over well to most people that saw it at first. And it's sort of it's sort of the story of the company, and sort of the story of growing up as a kid and growing up as a skater. And so, really, there was nothing left. There was nobody left. There was nothing left of the brand except for this word that was still kind of there. There was one team rider that had not left the company, and it was Bill Pepper. Everybody had left.
At one point, he was the only rider on Element, was Billy. And he was just like this little Tasmanian devil, and just had so much energy, skated all day, all night, and he was so stoked.
So, it was Bill Pepper, the only pro, and me running the company. And it was really cool. And it was scary because we were by ourselves sort of trying to figure it out. And right around that exact time, there was stories about a guy on the East Coast by the name of Reese Forbes. He just was old school, new school, no school, didn't care, skated super fast, and he could ollie like you've never seen before. And I fell in love with the skateboarding. I mean, I truly did. It was probably one of the most defining moments of me watching a skateboarder. And the Element team was officially Bill Pepper and Reese Forbes as an amateur.
I met Johnny Schillereff here in good old New York City, probably around 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think like Johnny having that like East Coast influence and like the roots coming from here, as soon as that all started to happen, then it was like just logical for him to go and pick a team that was involved with that scene.
Most of my resources were coming from the East Coast, even though I was on the West Coast at that point. So when I would get team riders, I would just naturally look to the East Coast.
Philadelphia, New York, Boston, these places have always generated just, a lot of talent, a lot of creativity.
There's a lot of history here, and with that being said, you have a lot of rough streets, cobblestone, brick buildings. Things just look different here. A lot of us had to swim upstream just to even get anybody to look at us. You have to earn it. We're dealing with 4 seasons, and the winters suck, and if you want to survive it, you got to be tough.
And because it gets freezing cold, there's so much erosion here and stuff. Like it rains, it snows, so the ground just gets beat up like crazy. There's a crack in front of and after every spot.
The East Coast is already rough as it is. Like there's always a crack in front of the handrail or the stairs, and it's always like really rough ground, and if you fall on your hand, like it'll just cut it like a cheese grater.
It's like the working class of skateboarding over here, basically.
There's just a certain vibe, like an East Coast kind of vibe that if you're from there, you can never really shake it, and it finds its way into your projects. And I think Element really started to speak to me when the team had those influences in it, that I was like, these are skaters I like.
As Element grew, Reese Forbes, Tim O'Connor, and Kenny Hughes, and that whole team was just amazing.
And I was only like 14 at the time, so I was just kind of like, just analyzing the whole situation, like, man, these guys are on a mission.
but I think a key part of that team was Dan Wolf.
And Wolf came in and just like seized the day, seized the opportunity, knew all the right people.
And then, you know, him getting involved in Element was just a natural stage, you know, progression because of, you know, these East Coast contacts with obviously Reese and with Kenny and with everybody.
Well, Dave Duran, Kenny, Reese, Markovich, Tim got on like right about the same time I started working for it, and then I think within 6 months or a year, Donnie got on.
Every day we went out and got good footage and everything, so I had like built up this friendship with Dan, and we could work together really good.
Johnny was like the director of it all, and Wolf kind of was making it happen.
We had similar tastes in skaters, so the team kind of came together because of that, you know.
And then from there, Markovich actually went and he rode for Element.
When I got on Element, it was kind of like, what's he doing riding for Element? They're still kind of small and they hadn't, you know, really made any waves in the industry yet.
That made a lot of people take notice of Element because like he was like a big name at the time and he could have gone anywhere.
Chris has just been one of those guys that like I just remember being like, damn, I wish I was as good as him.
I think that was a big turning point for Element.
And so I give a lot of respect to Chris, and I think he was hugely important with Element.
That's where Element like kind of blew up, really.
You could kind of feel it happening, you know what I mean? You knew there was something special about it.
And these guys on the team, it's like, man, it's like something cool was happening, you know?
And I'll never forget that Dan and I one night we sat down and I just said, listen, this is what we're going to do. I want to write down the dream team. I don't care if these guys are totally unachievable. At the end of the day, if you could just wipe the slate clean and nobody rode for anyone and there was no politics, who would you want to ride for Element? Like, let's sit down and let's discuss it. And we wrote down 9 guys that we thought we would love to ride for Element. And we both agreed on the team. It was like the ultimate team. And I remember that Jeremy Ray was on the list, and it was the one that he rode for Plan B. And it was like a joke that he was even on the list. Like, you just put him on the list because it was like, you know, a dream team. Like, it didn't have to be real. And we wrote it on a list, and we kept that piece of paper. And I think over the course of like 4 years, that every guy on that piece of paper ended up riding for Element.
It was definitely unique at the time, and they did have a really solid team, and it was growing. So it wasn't on top, and it was actually a surprise for a lot of people that I went from Plan B to ride for Element.
I mean, Jeremy will always remain one of those skateboarders that has done, to this day, tricks that people can't do. And I don't even care if he ollies off a curb again for the rest of his life. He's still one of the best skaters in the world and has set the standard for what everybody's doing today.
We wouldn't be here. I would have none of this. I wouldn't even know what skateboarding was if it wasn't for people putting it down and putting out the video parts necessary.
That's who you want to ride for. That's what you want to be like. That's what you want to skate like. You know, it was very, for me, it was very influential.
When I got on and like the way they were the underdog, and I was definitely rooting for the underdog. I wanted to help them and like be a part of something that was on its way up and growing, you know.
We skated really hard, man. Definitely. Like, we believed in what we were doing, you know, so we put everything into it, you know.
And then as Johnny started trying to pull himself away from that, he had, you know, a lot to do obviously running the brand, and he shouldn't be the guy talking to all the riders, you know. There should be someone in the middle to handle some stuff. So they got Kingman in there.
It was like I stepped into something that was really tight and really cool, and like it was already a clique, and it was already had all this energy, and like it was just on the verge of just like blowing up. You had, you know, Kenny Hughes, Tim O'Connor, Reese Forbes, Donnie Barley, Mike Frazier, Chris Markovich, Natas Kopis. You know, there was this crew of dudes that was just fierce.
I mean, I think one of the hardest things in skateboarding is to be a good team captain, because dealing with 10 different people, all unique individuals, and trying to get them all together and agree on things and get them out the door. I mean, it's just a very tough thing to do, but it's a great thing because it's a you know, because everybody is so different.
He was the glue that held everything together, and he was like the perfect guy for the job, you know. Babysitting the crazy wild skaters, I guess, you know.
It was almost seemed like there was two separate entities of Element. There was like Johnny, who was like doing it, and we all kind of knew he was doing it. We all supported it, and then it was us on the streets doing it. And like, we were all like, we were just like, we had confidence in him, and he had confidence in us. And you know, we were like the troops, and he was, I guess, like the general.
You know, and everybody kind of had a different position on the team, you know. We go to one park, and, you know, it would be like Markovich's park, and he would just, you know, be doing the most incredible skating you've seen, you know, because he's Markovich, you know. And then we go to another park, and it would be Reese's day, you know. And then, you know, Kenny and Tim, it would just, it was like we all had our turn to sort of, like, shine, you know. Went everywhere and just skated our asses off, man.
And I think that is a huge part of why Element started becoming successful, because the amount of hours put in while other people were sleeping, we were building the company.
These guys were ripping. I was trying to keep it all together, and Johnny was doing the same thing in a different world.
I mean, he had a vision of what he wanted for the brand, and then he just focused on really fine-tuning that.
So, you know, his battle was in one arena, and our battle was in another. But we're both battling towards a greater objective.
I think it's one of Johnny's greatest traits is that he was able to stick with that tone, you know, and hold the brand.
I'd go in and check out Johnny at work and see him working on stuff, and he was laying out ads and graphics, and it was all, I'd never been exposed to that stuff before. I was like, wow, this is how you do it, this is cool. But Element was pretty small.
There were hardly any employees, and everybody did everything. There was no such thing as a job description. If you worked there, you did everything. You mopped the floors, you packed the boxes, you answered the phones, you did sales, you did operations, you did accounting, and it was complete chaos.
At that point, I was paying the bills, HR, all that stuff, so it was more, hey, are we going to have enough money to make payroll? Are we going to have enough money to, you know, make sure the team gets their money to, you know, I mean, it was small, it was hard, it was, you know, there was nothing easy about it.
It was just it was electric, man. It was like a rad scene to be around.
You know, you just pick up the pieces. It's not, hey, it's not my job. It's okay to get it done, which is what it had to be back then.
We used to screen all the Element boards. I was, my first job there was I was responsible for scraping off all the excess paint with a razor blade. So I was scraping paint off all these Element boards like all day long. And you know, after work, we'd all skate the ramp after work. Every day. It was awesome. It was like Kenny Hughes, Reese Forbes, Tim O'Connor was always around, and Johnny, Oblo, Kyle, DeWitt.
Yeah, we skated the ramp every day with Kenny and Reese and Johnny and Kingman, and the ramp was amazing, the crew was amazing. I was like one of the ramp locals as they were filming like Third Eye View and all that.
It was a small little family, and it was a lot of hard work. I mean, we just busted our asses to make things happen. And it was when skateboarding was almost like starting all over again. And it was really, really hard. And there were some big companies out there at the time that were totally intimidating that we were up against. And we were just trying to keep the lights on. And that was our goal. Every day you drive to work just hoping you could stay in business for another day. And that was what it was like. And, you know, you'd just turn the lights off at night even if you went home, and you'd say, shit, I hope we're in business tomorrow. And that was kind of the, you know, at that point, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about anything but just the passion and the love and just the fire inside and loving what you do. And you did everything at all costs to make it work. And those were the early days of Element, and somehow it worked.
As big as people think Element is going to get, Johnny always keeps true to his roots and does what he likes to do, you know?
And he's created something, or we have created something that's much bigger than anyone would have ever anticipated.
It's about individuality and individual expression, and that's the important stuff, man. That's what makes skateboarding what it is. So I think that's also what makes Element one of the best skateboarding brands in the history of skateboarding.